Hi there, and welcome to this month's edition of Real Estate Matters with Clare Girton and myself, Ayse Clare. This is a show about matters in real estate, that real estate matters and is important, and how real estate affects us and our local neighborhoods. For some, real estate is the largest investment. Both Clare and I are residential realtors focused right here on the main line and local surrounding areas. Hi, Clare. How are you?
Hi, Ayse. So glad to be back. It's been a few months. We've had a little bit of hiatus from our, monthly conversations, and I'm really excited to be back today and to have this conversation. Lots happening, as usual, in the market, and you and I have been talking about and discussing that there's a lot of interesting narrative out there, a perception of what's happening in the market. The word crazy is being used. And, we're here today to really dig down, to talk about that perception and that market and really what is actually happening. We like to say it's not crazy, but that it's interesting and it's something to pay attention to. And we can focus on actually what's happening in the market to help buyers and sellers navigate the shifting market. It's not as doom and gloom as media likes to put out first. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Totally agree. I think our hope is to break some of those perceptions down a little bit further instead of them being so surfacey or conversational that quickly used in a conversation, if that makes sense.
It does. It does make a lot of sense. Before we do go into some of those questions, I think also I'd like to point out that this is the way we do our work daily, which is we do ask questions about what we're seeing in the market, right? We're constantly so that we can be better prepared to help buyers and sellers navigate or think about or look at what's exactly happening in their local market, in their specific neighborhood, in relationship to the national market.
Absolutely. And then through that, be able to provide very thought out and educated options for those consumers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to jump right into interest rates. Because they've been such a big topic.
Yep.
And I think off the cuff, I'm hearing people say, rates have doubled and mortgage interest rates have doubled, to elaborate. So I want to say, what do you say to that, Clare?
That's always an interesting when someone says that, oh no, rates have doubled. So I always say, well, let's think about this in long term. We could even go back 50 years. In our lifetime, if you look at the historical trend of interest rates, they were up, in the 70s, they were up to 16%. That is, you can't even fathom it.
No, right now we can't.
And how those have the trending have come down very, very low. And we've enjoyed a market in the last 2 to 3 years because of the situation of pandemics and other things in the market where the interest rates were so historically low that gave people a sense that every time you made an investment or a purchase, that it was going to be an investment. And we've maybe need to shift back a little bit our mindset and our thinking to that when we purchase a property is that the investment ramifications may look different or the time frame may look different. Say more about what you think about that.
Well, to jump back to something you were saying about the historic interest rates, I think we were looking, so from 70s to maybe early to mid 90s, that's a span of 20-ish years.
Yep.
Rates were on average, I believe, 8%, just about 8% and above. So that's a couple decades worth of rates being at that point.
And we're not there today.
We're not there at this time. We have been, I'll say, spoiled to have some lower rates in the past several years to help spur the economy. And I do think it worked.
Yes.
And so some of the folks who have gotten used to that, and I get it, are now looking at rates and saying, what? No, it's not making much financial sense. But then we looked at, okay, well, historically speaking, now we're talking about the whole history of mortgage interest rates. We're actually right about average. Where we are today. Today is, what month are we? We are the month of March. So looking at that, we're about average. So we want to be able to put that in perspective for maybe some of the younger home buyers in age, that they can see perhaps what their parents had bought things for, and to say, are we really? Yes, they may have doubled prospectively speaking, but
in a short amount of time.
Yeah,
but
are they really?
And what does that mean for a buyer? So say a young buyer started looking a year ago, and in a year's time, that has shifted.
Yeah, I think regrouping with their mortgage lender is important to see if their home purchase bracket needs to be adjusted down or adjusted up, because that's going to be the direct impact into their monthly payment, if that makes sense. And it's possible that they could get less of a home now, more of a home, depending on what that, or the same type
depending
of home.
on how that looks like. So we highly recommend, regrouping with a valued mortgage advisor and, get a real handle on those numbers.
Yeah. And that lender can also, run your numbers at a little bit higher and a little bit lower, so you can see what the difference in payment is, or is there really much of a difference? Is that so impactful to you as the consumer?
You bring up a good point about payments, monthly payments. So instead of focusing on, we're going to be double of what we were a year ago, is what your monthly payment that is comfortable for you, and work within that framework to make your choices about what you want to purchase. And then also, you alluded to it, but change our mindset a little bit about not necessarily what kind of return on value we're going to get or the equity we're going to build, but that when your monthly payment, if you're renting or if you're purchasing, you're paying your mortgage, that is money that you're putting aside for that month. If you put it into rent, you never see it again. If you're paying to live for that month, part of your monthly nut, into a mortgage, you're essentially paying yourself the principal. The interest, adds up, but that you're paying down your mortgage. So you're still investing in yourself with your property purchase. Doesn't mean that the equity won't be built over time. With the average ownership is about 7 years, but you will be building up equity by just paying your mortgage down, even if it doesn't double the value of the home, if values start to level off.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So I think it's always helpful to think about things a little bit like from a buyer's point of view and a seller's point of view. Actually, let's talk a little bit about a seller's point of view. So we are really low in inventory. That's something that is out there, meaning that there are way more buyers, it's a supply and demand, than sellers right now. And some sellers, we get some pushback that say, well, where am I going to go, and why I can't sell because I have nothing to buy? So what kind of options do you see around that question?
Yeah, good point, because we do want to look at it from both the buyer perspective and the seller perspective. So some sellers aren't intending to purchase after they sell, depending where they are in the chapter of their life. So if they're not intending to make a purchase, then perhaps, I'll say directly, the rates aren't quite going to be affecting them. But perhaps it gives them a time to rent, maybe rent in their dream location to see if it really is a dream location for them and how they like it, especially if they are still working and perhaps their work has allowed them to work virtually, or they'll be changing jobs to their dream location and finding something local there. But I think it gives them that opportunity to rent in a location where they've always wanted to go and enjoy it.
And try out a right size, maybe, you know, say if you are at the end of your career and you're thinking about downsizing, right sizing, you might try rent in a 55 and over community. See
how you really like it before committing to a purchase.
And in the meantime, if you're selling your house right now, you really are going to have a great chance to get a ton of equity out of it.
To maximize that.
That's
for
great.
For sure. Some other options is to live with family. I know that doesn't work for everyone. Either their family's not local or they really don't have family to live with, but that could be for some an alternative to be able to then figure out what their next step might be.
And again, to maximize the value from selling now, especially since we have way more buyers than we have sellers.
That's right. We also thought perhaps if a seller decides to rent after they sell their exit home, we'll call it, that timeline, we want to be sensitive, that might be a longer timeline. I should say, if they are intending to purchase, that timeline to purchase may be longer. It may not be, depending where things are right in that, I guess, the market in that time. But it could take a little bit longer to find the very right home. So we also want to keep that in mind and be able to share that expectation with them. Another possibility.
And if you might be rewarded if you're willing to wait that out, then the seller's market might shift towards the buyer's market, which is something that's been predicted, so that you might have more options.
That's right. And you'll already have extinguished your exit home. You already have left your exit home, so you'll have nothing to sell. And in order to compete in today's market,
I love that point.
You cannot really. It's very far
have a home sale contingency.
Exactly. Another thought is to rent back from the buyer you have. So stay in place, stay in your current home, become a pseudo tenant for a little bit of time while you go look for.
And today's buyers might be more, especially if they want to be competitive in these multiple offers that we're seeing. Again, it seems like a resurgence this spring market, that they might be more apt to say, yes, you can live here for 6 months and, pay us a rental fee, and that will give you some time to look for your next. I heard a story the other day from a colleague agent that one of the offers said, and it was a downsizing or a next, right sizing single woman seller. And they said, we will go ahead and take a suitcase in your house and take whatever you want, and you can leave anything else. So that was part of their offer, which was take everything that you need and want. We want to make it as easy as possible for you. So
fabulous.
There is a way to maximize those situations.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure you're hearing this as well. So one question we get often from, I'd say, more buyers than anything is, where do you think mortgage rates are going and home pricing is headed? That's a big question.
It's a big question.
One we get. So if you were to break that down, where do you think mortgage rates are going? Like, what are you saying to people when that question is being asked of you?
Well, oftentimes I turn the question at first back to the person who is asking it and say, where do you think and what is your experience? Because that helps us get into a conversation about the historical trends of mortgage rates and, what their needs are. So it really, to me, becomes a conversation about what are rates today, what are we seeing day by day, week by week, and how that affects their specific personal story. What are your thoughts on that?
I remember at the end of 2021, we were putting together binders with information for both our buyers and seller clients to give throughout the year of 2022. And we put together some information from valued resources. We listened to the chief economist of the National Association of Realtors as part of it, as well as reputable sites that kind of forecasted where mortgage interest rates were going. Of course, something could have curtailed it, but it was interesting at the end of 2022, looking back on our highlight sheet of trends and forecasts. The forecast from the end of 2021 to the end of 2022 was, at that time, I think rates were in the low threes. It was that there would be maybe about 3 to 5 increases in mortgage interest rates over that year, and they would go no higher than about 4%. And as you know, that did not happen. I think we had more rate increases, and they went up higher than 4%. I think maybe even 7 at one point. So I like to share that story because predictions don't always work on this. So I really think is you never know what the market's doing until you look back, right?
Yep.
You never really have a grasp on that until you look back and say, oh. So in my mind, it's, well, what do you need right now, buyer or seller? What's going on right now in your life to answer that question more so? Well, where are rates right now? And then I'm going to then judge what my next move will be.
Right.
Because rates are not something that we control. That's something that
the economy controls.
That's an uncontrollable. So I say to folks is focus on where your life is at, what you want out of it at the moment, to then be able to answer if it makes sense to move or stay in place.
And make some decisions. Like you mentioned before, a timeline decision, or maybe it might actually help you think about making a decision more quickly rather than kind of hesitating. Because sometimes hesitating gives you, you need a place to live. We need to make decisions for our family and our well-being and our health. And sometimes hesitating precludes us from actually living in the moment. And I think that our industry helps us kind of recenter on that, refocus. What does that mean for you and your family?
Yeah, so well said.
Yeah.
So well said. So kind of dovetailing interest rates, I wanted to move to home pricing and values, where it's headed, what we're seeing, what we've seen. So thinking about that, I know we hear this word tossed around a lot about overpaying. That person overpaid. What are your thoughts for buyers who paid, let's say, $50,000 to $100,000 over asking price? And are they feeling worried that they overpaid from a value standpoint, from maybe a reselling standpoint? What does that conversation look like to you, Claire?
And it is a really common one right now. I'm hearing this a lot. A lot of people who aren't even looking to buy or sell will ask me these questions and say, oh, my neighbor down the block, oh, they overpaid. And so let's center and refocus. You and I have talked about this. If you go back to our trend lines, if you go back for the last 20 years, more, the average cost increase, value increase for the last 50 years is about 4% a year. And if you look at that trend line over the years, that is where we actually are now.
So what do you mean? Say that again, if you will.
Yeah. So in the last, let's use 20 years. The last 20 years, the trend line, which is the average over the last 20 years, is about 4% increase in value over the last 20 years. But if you look at the actuality of what happened in those years, in 07, 06, 07, it went above 4%. And then it dropped pretty significantly after 08, after the mortgage or the financial crash. But then we saw a gradual. In the last 2 years,
if at all, some points
we just
down, flat,
up
a little bit.
And this is interesting when you do an overlay of the interest rates as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. Is when interest rates went really low, we got a value spike. But when you look at that trend line from 20 years ago, 4%, we're finally at where that 4% trend line is.
Despite that not really being what happened per se. So for example, like in 2009, values were here.
Yep.
And then in 2020, 2021, 2022, they took, a huge...
A spike,
30, 20, 40, a bigger spike than normal. But you're saying if you take that spike and kind of push it out from year to year,
right,
where we were and where we are, it's still like a gradual...
It still averages out to be about a 4%. It just felt like a big gradual. So did people really overpay, or are they now on par of what the values will be? Now, it will be different for everybody. Most buyers are in their home for 7 years. So that trend line should help with that, value, keeping that value, even though, or, there may be some people who bought a house last year and still thought, wow, that was way more than I wanted to spend. Things change, and maybe they'll resell it to this year because we need inventory and they're going to get what they bought it for, if not more. So there are different ways to look at it, but I don't think it's anything to hesitate on. I think it's really important to really look at that information and what that means for buyers and sellers.
Yeah, so well said.
Yes.
I think also when doing a buyer consultation with folks who are in the current market and the recent past market, in my opinion, those buyers would have stepped up with their offers if their likelihood to stay in this next home was a longer term home.
Yeah, that's true.
If the buyer is saying, oh, this is just a short term home, then that might not have been the market for them. And that's where I think the consumers rely on us to give them those different perspectives. Having a buyer sit off to the side isn't going to directly benefit us per se, but being able to educate and be more of a consultative salesperson, so to speak, to them, I think that value that we'll be able to give them is much more important to the picture.
Along that line, Ayse, and I feel pretty confident that your clients are similar, is I'm impressed with the clients of today because they are willing. There's so much information out there. And once you kind of can peel an onion a little bit, they are willing to do the thinking about what's going to be good for them and what really it means for their investment or their lifestyle. We've had this conversation as well. And I value those conversations, and I'm always impressed once you start to actually have them with how, informed buyers and sellers really are, or how much they want to be, I think is really making me feel hopeful about, the market and for buyers and sellers.
Yeah, you're right. There is so much information out there. Yeah. It's hard to disseminate it all. And that's what we're hoping to do here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So rates, we've talked about values. Any thoughts on, let's see, maybe some action items that buyers can take right now to better prepare themselves for a move? We hit on some things, in my opinion. I think
it's worth it to say it again. That buyers, it's not a time to be, go get in a hole and hide.
Yeah, it's being scared.
It's a time to actually look really closely at who you are, what your situation is. I often say this to my buyers who are in multiples. I have one set that are on their 5th multiple offer, still gonna get the house that they want. And I keep saying, let's go back to what your central needs are and where you are, your positioning. They're in great positioning. They're in the beginning of their earning years. Their outlook is positive. So they're going to end up in a good place if they just have to stay with the process.
So you're having, it sounds like, these deep conversations and really focusing on the individual buyer, the individual client, let's say the individual person or persons at hand, to be able to say where are you at? What are your hopes for the future? Do you need to wait a little bit? Is this going to be a good time for you?
What's possible?
Yeah. Oh, the possibilities.
And again, back to your point, we can't always make the right predictions, but we can only focus on now and today. And we have today to focus on and make decisions accordingly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think also that helps us with these conversations with, let's say, buyers right now to prepare themselves. It is information so that they can make the educated decisions. And we're fortunate that we also partner up with valued partners like mortgage lenders to help them. To me, that's another huge overlay to help them break down the options of what does that financial situation look like? What are the options around all of that? And then for folks who just, after those conversations are there and they're still feeling some sort of either hesitancy to move forward, or hesitancy to sit on the sidelines, they're still feeling some sort of limbo or in limbo, you can always reevaluate, I tell them. So let's say we do start, or they do decide to stay on the sidelines. Well, let's hook back up in a month or so. Where are you at? Has anything changed? Here's what's changed or hasn't changed about the market. Are things still, in a holding pattern, or has something changed to either improve the situation? So I think reevaluation is really key. It doesn't have to be every day, every week, but at least every month to figure out, have things changed to help and to support their goals, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And just like we try to tell ourselves, if I was going to wait to have a dinner party until my house was perfect, I would never have a dinner party.
Oh, okay.
So in the same process with buying and selling, if you're going to wait until it's perfect, it won't be perfect. So, like using what
is perfect.
Exactly, nothing, right? But using what our situations, our current situations, and really taking the time to understand them and how they affect us and make good choices for ourselves and our family, I think has been valuable to me, as a professional and as a citizen, resident.
Yeah, wonderful. On that note, did you want to wrap up, or anything else did you feel that you wanted to add in regards to our shifting market and getting focused about it? Like you said, peeling those layers back.
Yeah, I think where a wrap up would be is, let's continue to have these conversations. I mean, when I think back about what have we been doing this now, over a year? It's kind of interesting to look back at some of those conversations we were having and how that has changed. And we continue to re-examine, relook at really what is happening in our local market, in juxtaposed to our national market.
Well said. Always a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, Ayse. Yes, same.
We could go on and on.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for sharing your perspective of the shifting market and getting real on some phrases and things that we hear in today's market.
All right.
Wonderful.
Next time.
See you next time, Claire.